Last week, I made a video where I talked about Seaworld Entertainment's possible bankruptcy. I took an in-depth look at the company and tried to assess their financial situation along with if they are likely to go completely bankrupt. And in that video, I came to the conclusion that they're most likely not going to go bankrupt anytime soon. Or so I thought. Since I released that last video, several major developments have occurred that turned Seaworld's bankruptcy from something that would never happen to something that has a tiny chance of becoming a reality really soon. Honestly, I really didn't want to make this video for several reasons, but there is some very concerning information that has the potential to change everything along with a very popular rumor that I need to dispel. So in this video, I will try to make sense of everything going on with Seaworld while looking at what's rumored to be happening with the company. And then I will answer one very important question that I purposely left out last video. What actually happens if Seaworld does really go bankrupt? This is a very important question because honestly there's a lot to talk about, including questions like what company could buy Seaworld? What will happen to all the animals? And when would this actually happen? So join me as I look at all things Seaworld and I answer the question of what really happens if Seaworld actually goes bankrupt. But like always, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe. I post new videos every week and I really appreciate all of the wonderful support that this channel has been getting. Now something you should know is that this video is a sequel to my last video I did called Is Seaworld Going Bankrupt? So before you watch this video, I encourage all of you to watch my other one first. And I know a lot of YouTube channels have done videos on what happens if Seaworld goes bankrupt, but this video is going to be very different from all of those. Because if Seaworld went bankrupt, their future might not be exactly what you think. But now let's get to the video. So things already look pretty bad for Seaworld, but a lot of coaster enthusiasts don't know just how bad they've had it. They've already had multiple liens filed against them and are in a tremendous amount of debt and are facing multiple lawsuits. Because of the pandemic, they had to lay off a huge amount of staff and they are losing millions of dollars every single month. And they were just forced to pay a $65 million settlement, and believe it or not, things just got way worse. And it looks like the Seaworld Entertainment chain might run out of cash very soon. Up until recently, it looked like Seaworld had enough cash to sustain operation until the end of 2021. This was from Seaworld's official quarterly results. Knowing that they have enough cash until the end of 2021 was a very reassuring thing, but a few things happened that might have the smallest chance to change that. The first significant thing that happened is the news that Busch Gardens Williamsburg and Water Country USA might not open at all this summer. This would result in millions of dollars lost for the chain. Seaworld says that they have enough cash to deal with this, but I don't think they were ready for this at all. The Virginia government is not letting any theme parks reopen until Virginia reaches phase 3 of reopening, but the catch is that they would only be allowed to operate with 1,000 patrons. Yes, you heard me right, only 1,000 people. So to put this in perspective, Busch Gardens' typical capacity is 24,000. This is suicide for any park to try to open with only 1,000. Kings Dominion and Busch Gardens both said that they're not even going to try opening the park with only 1,000 patrons. It just isn't financially feasible. Now Busch Gardens and Kings Dominion already tried to ask the Virginia government to modify the phase 3 reopening requirements, but the Virginia government didn't budge. So this will result in tons of money lost for the parks, and they're most likely not even going to open at all this year. This definitely hurts the company and adds another thing to the list of problems, but it doesn't necessarily destroy it. The thing that has potential to totally destroy Seaworld is the fact that there's a very popular rumor that the majority shareholder in Seaworld might purposely try to force the company to file for bankruptcy. You've probably all heard this rumor before, but basically the rumor is that the shareholder that owns the most equity in Seaworld might try to purposely bankrupt it. Hillpath Capital, which owns a 34.80% share in Seaworld, might see it as most profitable to bankrupt the company. Hillpath has also been very involved in the company Dave & Buster's, which got brutally hit by the pandemic also. So it unfortunately makes sense that they might want to get out of the amusement industry in one way or another. Their thinking is that if they bankrupt the company, they will at least see some sort of return in investment by selling the parks and downsizing the company. To put this in perspective, Hillpath lost a tremendous amount of money by investing in Seaworld, and they want to get it back in one way or another. That is a rumor as of now, and before all of you start freaking out, let me be 100% clear that this is only a rumor and is most likely not true. People online are treating this as it is a fact, but it's not. The bottom line is that it's merely just a rumor. The fact is that the majority of these rumors come down to one single article by the Orlando Weekly. This is somewhat suspicious that they all lead down to one source, and this means a lot of people are jumping to conclusions when talking about Seaworld's possible bankruptcy. And after studying the article for a while, several red flags started to appear, and I don't think anything like the article says will ever happen. But I'll talk about this more at the end of the video because there's a lot wrong with this rumor. But let's just pretend for 1 second that these rumors are 100% truthful and they do actually declare bankruptcy soon. What would happen? Because honestly, there's a lot up in the air. Just for the record, I don't think that they will go completely bankrupt, but if they did, here's what it would possibly look like. Just imagine that it's at the end of the 2020 amusement season. Busch Gardens Williamsburg doesn't open at all, and Seaworld San Diego opens very late. The company is struggling and they decide that they need to do some major reconstruction of the company. They may or may not file for bankruptcy, but they need to reconstruct their company in a way that's more profitable for them. So what would they do? There are multiple options and I'm going to go through all of them. The first option is the most obvious one, and that is to downsize the company by selling off the parks that aren't the most profitable. I don't think Seaworld would need to sell their entire company. Instead, they would just sell the park that brings in the least amount of money. And one park that I could definitely see being on the chopping block is Aquatica San Diego. Aquatica San Diego is already supposed to be turned into a Sesame Street park in 2021. If Seaworld doesn't have the cash to go through with the Sesame Street rebranding, I could definitely see this park being sold to a water park company. On the other hand, Sesame Street parks are also very profitable parks, and if they do go forward with the rebranding, it could definitely save the park and make it even more attractive for potential buyers. Just selling one park would buy a tremendous amount of time for the chain, but who knows how many parks they will actually end up selling. It all depends on how much trouble they are really in. A while ago, there were rumors that Merlin Entertainment, the company that owns Legoland, was interested in buying the Busch parks from Seaworld. This would be very interesting to see Merlin acquire more parks in the United States, and I could actually easily see this happening if Seaworld was going completely bankrupt and dying. But basically, if Seaworld was contemplating going bankrupt, they would have two main options on how to save their company. The first option would be for another company such as Six Flags or Cedar Fair to do a complete company buyout. This would mean that if things got bad enough for Seaworld, they could potentially accept an offer from a company like Six Flags to buy their entire company and all of its properties. And before you get too worried that Busch Gardens is going to be the next Six Flags park, I just want to say that the only way that I could see this happening is if things got much worse for the company. I mean, to a point where they don't even have a chance at being profitable again. Last year, Six Flags was rumored to offer Seaworld a proposal to buy the entire company, but nothing came to fruition. And I mean, Six Flags also isn't in the greatest financial shape right now, so I think this is super unlikely. The next option would be for Seaworld to sell off the Busch Gardens parks while keeping the Seaworld parks for themselves. And like I mentioned earlier, Merlin has already expressed interest in buying the Busch parks, but I think there's also other companies that could buy them. I think Hershand would be a great buyer for Busch if Seaworld was dying, and I think they would run the parks very well. But the bottom line is that whoever offers the most money will buy the parks, and hopefully it's not Six Flags. But Seaworld may not necessarily like the idea of selling the Busch parks for two main reasons. The first reason is that Seaworld wouldn't want to sell the Busch parks because both BGT and BGW are some of the most successful parks in the entire chain, and I couldn't see them giving these parks up unless they physically had to. And on top of this, unlike the Seaworld parks, the Busch Gardens parks aren't tied to any controversy in any way, so I think Seaworld would try to keep these parks as long as they could, even if it means selling other parks instead. And the last option would be for them to sell all of the Seaworld parks and only keep the Busch Gardens parks. Now this seems like it could happen except for one small detail, and that is the fact that Seaworld will never get rid of Seaworld Orlando unless they physically have to, or a buyer like Universal overpays for it. Getting rid of Seaworld Orlando would basically mean getting rid of one of their most profitable parks, and no company in their right mind would do this. It's much more likely that they would get rid of their other Seaworld parks and only keep Seaworld Orlando, Aquatica Orlando, and the Busch Gardens parks. But what I actually predict is going to happen is slightly different. I think if Seaworld was forced to sell their parks, I think in order to survive they would only need to sell 2 to 4 parks, and those parks are Seaworld San Diego, Aquatica San Diego, Seaworld San Antonio, and Aquatica San Antonio. They could easily sell these parks to one of two companies, either Merlin or Six Flags. Merlin would have an incentive to buy the California parks because of its proximity to Legoland, and Six Flags could buy it because they wanted to get another property in the California amusement industry. And the same can be said with the Texas parks. Selling these parks would provide enough cash for Seaworld to stay afloat a little longer until they can be profitable again. And you're probably thinking that Merlin and Six Flags know nothing about animals and they would get rid of all of them. But that's not necessarily the case. They could easily make a deal to acquire not only the park but its staff and resources. If they did this, the park would basically stay the same but with a different name. Now, even though I think that is the most likely option, I don't think it's very likely to ever happen at all, mainly for one reason, and that reason is the fact that the rumor of SeaWorld's main investor purposely bankrupting the company is very likely completely false. Yes, you heard me right, I think SeaWorld's financial troubles are being exaggerated a lot. The article from Orlando Weekly made it seem like SeaWorld's investor really wants to bankrupt the company to receive a return on their investment, but there are two things wrong with that. The first is that the article is based on a single now deleted blog post that none of us can see for ourselves, so the article is purely secondhand information. And the second thing wrong with the article is the fact that there is a possibility that Hillpath Capital might not even want to do this. They may have been considering it, but nothing is set in stone. The article treats it as fact, but the bottom line is that it's not. Last year, SeaWorld's attendance was up 9%, and without the pandemic, it could have been up even more. And even if they do take drastic action, the company is not going to die. It's most likely going to downsize. They're going to split the assets and maybe even sell a park. But the bottom line is that we all just need to calm down when talking about SeaWorld's financial situation. Companies have been in trouble before, but they sometimes bounce back. Just look at Six Flags. SeaWorld said they have enough cash to survive until the end of 2021, and I think we should take their word on that. SeaWorld is definitely giving us all a scare, but unless I hear something official from the parks, I think they are here to stay. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see content just like this every week, and comment below your thoughts on SeaWorld. Do you think that they will go bankrupt? This is the Coaster Josh, signing out.